Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. Today we're trying out this very silly Cascade combo deck, which I came across in the Brawl queue and I had to try it for myself. This deck is built around the Cascade and Discover mechanics, and if you take a look at the deck breakdown, you'll notice we only have one card in the deck with mana value 4 or less, and that one card is the centerpiece of the deck, Monstrous Vortex, a 4-mana enchantment saying whenever we cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. And the great thing about playing Monstrous Vortex as our build around card is that we're guaranteed to cascade into it if we cast our commander Imoti, which has a cascade mechanic, so we'll find a card with mana value 4 or less if that's not a land, and we'll get to cast it for free. So the goal is to cast Imoti as soon as possible, which is guaranteed to find our Monstrous Vortex, and then from now on, if we cast any of our 5-mana creatures in this deck, it's set up in such a way that they're guaranteed to discover into another 5-mana creature, which will keep chaining together until we have all our 5-drops on the battlefield, and that's usually enough to win the game. So now for the deck breakdown, because we have this weird restriction of not being able to play any cheap spells, we do still want a few plays we can make in the early turns, just so we don't sit there doing nothing until turn 5, and that's why we have a bunch of cards that still have a high mana value, but we can deploy on the cheap in some way. Maybe they're prototypes, maybe they have adventures which we can cast on the cheap, maybe they're the new room enchantments which also have a high combined mana value, or some cards have the channel ability which we can also discard on the cheap, and those are all ways to maybe still get something on the board or maybe help us ramp so we can cast Imoti a turn sooner. So the first category here are some of the cheaper non-ramp cards, including Overlord of the Flood Pits to draw 2 and discard, can also be part of the Discover chain once we start comboing off since it has power 5 or greater. The Amalgam can also combo off with the Discover chain, but we can also prototype it for 2 mana just to put a 2-3 on the battlefield, which can sometimes make all the difference when you're facing an aggro deck. Then there's the Gatekeeper, which can bounce an opposing creature with a 2-mana adventure, not part of the Discover combo chain, but it also doesn't interfere with it since we won't find it with our Discover ability. Then there's Shark Typhoon, which can maybe make a Shark token just to chum block an opposing creature early on. There's a Bottomless Pool to bounce a creature back for 1 mana. The Whale we can adventure to bounce a creature back. Then there's Emerald Dragon, which can counter an activated or triggered ability, so it can even stop fetch lands from working, for instance, so that can also slow the opponent down just a bit. The Armadillo can gain 3 life and find a basic, so it doesn't ramp, but at least the life gain is useful. Then there's the Vanguard, which can destroy artifacts or enchantments. Mirror Shell Crab is the only counter spell in the deck, so that can also come in handy. We've got the Serpent as another bounce spell. Sky Turtle can either bounce something with the channel ability or maybe even get the Vortex back from our graveyard should it get destroyed, and that's the only way we have of really recurring it. I guess a Green Cavalier could also come in handy there, but yeah, for the most part, if our opponent has enchantment removal, our game plan falls apart, so hopefully our opponent doesn't know what's happening and doesn't mulligan towards enchantment removal. And then the Meat Locker, another way to tap an opposing creature down and keep it stunned. And then we've got some ramp cards. Split cards are also fine to include since the combined mana value is still pretty high, so Spring can find an extra land. Beanstalk Wyrm as an adventure creature lets us play an extra land, but it's also part of the Discover combo chain. Then there's Overlord as another ramp card that we can also discover into. The Clear Cutter is a prototype creature, mana value is 6, so it doesn't interfere, but we can cast it for 3 mana just to make an extra green mana for us. The Tanuki we can channel to find an extra land. Beanstalk Giant we can adventure to find a land. And then Altanak does need a fetch land in the graveyard, but then for 1 and a green we can discard it to return a land from our graveyard and put it on the battlefield, so that's a 2-mana ramp spell basically. And then we've got some Eldrazi that can be cycled, drawing us a card and leaving behind an Eldrazi spawn token that can also be sacrificed for a colorless mana. And then the Moldering Gym, another ramp card finding a basic. And then we take a look at some of our 5-mana creatures that we can chain together. There's Desert Doom as a big dragon with a bit of protection. Sludge Monster can be important to shut down opposing abilities when it enters a battlefield. Cavalier of Gales lets us draw. We've got Nylia's Forerunner to give our team trample. Got the Paladin, which has the plot mechanic, which is also quite useful, since we can maybe plot the Paladin, and then on the following turn cast Imoti, find our Vortex, and then immediately cast a Paladin for free, which will set the chain in motion, so we don't even give the opponent a chance to react to our enchantment at sorcery speed. Then there's Rakdos, which can gain some life. Should the opponent have a board wipe to clear all our creatures, then we'll at least get a beast token from Rakdos, and there's a few other creatures that also have death triggers that can be beneficial. The Guardian, another way to give all our creatures trample, since we have a lot of ways to put +1 counters on the team. There's Yadora, which is a way to turn all our creatures into lands if they get destroyed, so that can also be a decent answer to opposing board wipes. The Stomper can gain life when it enters. We've got Balustrade Wyrm as the only haste creature, which can sometimes attack for lethal the turn we combo off, but for the most part we'll have to wait until we can turn our entire team sideways, but in the meantime the Wyrm can maybe finish off a Planeswalker. Then there's Battle Mammoth, which also has a foretell mechanic, so can maybe cast it on the cheap after foretelling it initially. And then a Defiler Vigor, another way to grow our team. We've got Elder Gargroth, just a powerful creature if it gets a chance to attack or block. Then a God Eternal Ronas will double all our creatures' power when it enters a battlefield, so if the cascade lines up properly and we first put a Hasty Wyrm on the battlefield and then resolve Ronas, then now the Wyrm can attack for a lot more than just 5 damage. Then there's a Wolverine, which is actually quite important as it can destroy artifacts or enchantments when it enters a battlefield. We've got the Green God, which at least if it gets destroyed turns into Temple of Cultivation, which can turn back into our god. Then a Railway Brawler might be one of the most important creatures here, not only because it has the plot mechanic, which can maybe speed things up, but it also allows us to put a lot of extra +1 counters on all our creatures, basically doubling our total power and toughness. Then there's the Tusker, which will put a +1 counter on all our creatures. Thrun has a bit of built-in protection, although we'll still die to opposing board wipes, which is our main weakness. And then a Vorinclex can find 2 forests, can also transform it. The War Chief can also gain life and will leave a Rhino token behind, similar to Thragtusk. Cavalier of Thorns can help us ramp when it enters, and the land is untapped, so that can maybe still let us cast an additional interactive spell once we're comboing off. And then if it dies, we can also get a card back out of our graveyard, so that's technically another way to access the Monstrous Vortex if it gets destroyed. Silverback Elder has a lot of useful abilities if we cast creatures afterwards, although it doesn't count if we've already discovered into them, so we'll have to wait until the following turn. And then Quandrix can also double a creature's +1 counters, so that can also maybe pump up the Wyrm that's ready to attack right away. And then finally, we're also playing with Keruga as our companion, as it's kind of a free roll in this deck. Now, this can be a bit of a giveaway to your opponents that know what's happening, so they might be more inclined to mulligan towards a hand that has either counter spells or enchantment removal, but every now and then you can actually cast Keruga after putting it in hand, and then it's also a lot of fun if you can cast it with your Monstrous Vortex on the battlefield. First, put a bunch of 5-drops in play. At some point you might need to stop, because then Keruga is going to resolve at the very end, and draw a card for each one of those creatures on the battlefield, so then there's a small risk you end up decking, but that's also why I've included a Reliquary Tower, so at least you don't have to discard to hand size. And then we've got lots of mana fixing, as well as plenty of fetch lands to make sure we can reliably enable Altanak, as well as just fixing our colors, so those are still useful. And then at first I did include a few creature lands, but in the end ended up cutting them since you don't actually end up using them all that often, and I wanted to avoid tap lands if necessary. We do have a very high land count, over 50 lands in the deck, but it's also because we need to reliably keep hitting our land drops, and it's not like we've got a whole lot going on in the early turns. And then Boseiju and Odawara can also offer a tad more interaction. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw, facing Rosheen, a Roaring Prophet, an X-Spell deck. So, what do we think of this hand? Don't have any early mana acceleration. We do have a Meat Locker for a little bit of interaction, which can keep Rosheen tapped down, perhaps. And then, yeah, I guess if Rosheen is tapped, it can't use its ability for a while. So maybe this is good enough. Although could certainly do better. Yeah, I'll take a free mulligan here. And I think this is better. We have both the Beanstalk Wyrm and the Clear Cutter to give us a small mana advantage. And then hopefully your opponent doesn't have any enchantment removal. Their deck is going to have a lot of expensive cards that aren't very good in the early game. So hopefully that means our game plan lines up favorably. I'll keep Forest on top since we need 5 mana. Play an additional land. Opponent's still not doing anything. So that kind of implies that once they do put Rosheen in play, it is going to be quite scary if they untap with it. So yeah, I'm not necessarily going to be able to stop it. Just play Clear Cutter, next turn Cascade into our enchantment. But our opponent will get to untap with Rosheen in the meantime. And that could do a lot of damage. And then they get to find additional X spells as well. Primal Might, Stonequill Serpent. Well, just gotta go for it and hope they can destroy my enchantments, and then hope we get an extra turn here. At 23 life with 2 blockers. Should be feasible, but you never know. If our opponent's got 7 X spells in hand, this can generate 14 mana. So that's no joke. And yeah, that's just about 14 mana. I see a number of burn spells. It's going to be a Primal Might, taking out Imoti for starters. That's fine. I don't see any enchantment removal. Great Henge. And then Song can do some damage too. But yeah, nothing that straight up wins the game. And then next turn we should be in business. Opponent's gonna conjure a bunch of Llanowar Elves and Marwyn. And I guess that draws off Great Henge as well, so pretty good. Although we should find creatures that can also interact with Rosheen. Alright, opponent discards to hand size. And then do we have a preference here? I guess God Eternal Ronas makes sense, since it will double some of our hasty creatures as well. And we can already destroy the Great Henge. And yeah, we'll just keep it going. Can put pretty much every creature in play here. There's no risk of decking like we sometimes run into when we're casting Keruga to enable the Monstrous Vortex, because then we're going to draw a bunch of cards afterwards as well. But yeah, our opponent would get to untap with a ton of mana still, so those burn spells are quite scary. So it is important that we find creatures that can offer some amount of interaction. Make sure to cast the right half. And there's Sludge Monster, so that can make Rosheen lose its abilities. Got a bit of life gain as well. So we'll keep it going. Opponent's patiently waiting, because they have a lethal burn spell in hand. So all these creatures will enter, and then Ronas will double power and toughness. But there's not too many haste creatures, sadly. So it's definitely not going to be enough to win the game on the spot. Alright, is that all of them? Looks like it. So let the triggers resolve. And starting with the Railway Brawler is excellent, since we get to double power and toughness, basically. And then target Forerunner. This is a thing of beauty. Put a land in play, that's untapped. And then Sludge Monster targets Rosheen. And what to discard here? Probably don't need the Moldering Gem, although there's a way to maybe trigger our Defiler, so I suppose a land can go. Tusker adds more counters. Get to see some cool animations. And then destroy artifact or enchantments. Okay. And then I can still cast a Moldering Gem. Using Defiler to get some more counters. And that's all we've got. Go to attackers. Just a Wyrm attacking for 23 trample. So are we still dead? Rosheen lost its abilities, but Marwyn and the elves can still make a boatload of mana. So 14... yeah, we should be able to survive a card like Banefire. But we'll see. Maybe they can remove the Sludge Monster and then still tap Rosheen for a bunch of mana and figure out a way to win. So opponents either disconnected or struggling to figure out which creatures are attacking, and I can't blame them. We have a scroll wheel to go through all of them. Alright, opponent took it, so they might have disconnected, we'll see. Opponent's at 4. We certainly have enough blockers here, so that's not the concern. But a burn spell to the face could maybe get it done. But yeah, I guess if we go and have a look at the Sludge Monster, it's also a 12/12, thanks to all those counters. So it's not that easy to remove with another burn spell. So we should be fine. And yep, opponent timed out, so they seem very much dead. Alright, let's go to attackers. If our opponent did somehow have a board wipe, then there were still plenty of creatures that can provide value, like the gods turning into lands. There's Yedora, which can also turn our creatures into forests. So that's another interesting interaction here. And then we still had some leftovers to try and close out the game afterwards. Cavalier of Thorns also gets something back out of the graveyard. So board wipes, unless they exile everything, aren't really a problem. And looks like our opponent's timing out once again, so sadly don't get to see how much damage we would have dealt. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing Anzrag, the Quake-Mole, a deck that could present a pretty fast clock. So I don't think I can keep a hand without any sort of ramp or other interaction. This is better. We can ramp with a Lurker to cast Imoti turn 4, and then turn 5 we can combo. And then the main concern against red-green is going to be enchantment removal, which our opponent could certainly have. Happy to keep a land on top. For now can fetch tap land as well. No cheap mana acceleration from our opponent, but now Rising of the Day means they can get in with a hasty Anzrag. So that's quite scary. We get to Surveil. And yeah, just hoping to find something that can maybe offer interaction. If not, we'll just have to take the hit. Imoti can maybe chump for a turn. Although then our opponent just gets an additional attack phase. Alright, never mind. Opponent goes for a Captain Lannery instead. Maybe fearing a counter spell, since they don't exactly know what's happening. And I'll let our elves. So unless they've got a burn spell for my spawn token here, we should get to cast Imoti. Yeah, with the silverback we technically have a way to destroy enchantments, but that's going to be too slow. So I think we just go for it. And then if their turn is just Anzrag attack, we should be fine. Emoti's happy to get in the way if needed. It looks like our opponent did have a lightning bolt after all, so they could have bolted the spawn token end of turn. Decided to go after Imoti instead. Okay. Is it Anzrag time? Nope, it's O'Hare Castle time, which can also cheat creatures into play. Well, hopefully it's nothing that destroys enchantments. Primeval Titan's not a bad one. Get 2 more lanes, but they're down to 1 card in hand. And yeah, despite our opponent having a very powerful start, I think we'll get to a Nectar combo. And then I think Tusker makes the most sense, since that will put counters on all our creatures after putting them in play. That provides the most value. And then against red-green, not afraid of board wipe. We'll gain some life here as well. So we should be able to stabilize nicely. And now we get to enjoy the show. Cavalier also finds an untapped land. A Railway Brawler is going to be quite powerful. So the later we find it, the better, because that means more creatures will double their power. Got a hasty Wyrm that can attack. Can now destroy the Rising of the Day as well. Got our own god. We should be almost through. Sludge Monster probably going for either Primeval Titan or the Deepest Growth. There's some more life gain. Alright, that's the last one. And now everything will enter the battlefield. Sadly, Ronas won't synergize with our haste creature here. And then, yeah, let's sludge the Primeval Titan. Destroy enchantments. And now we get to add more counters thanks to the Brawler. And I guess this is our only great option. Get some more lanes. And our opponent scoops it up. They drew the line at searching for 2 forests. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Vren the Relentless. So don't expect any real enchantment removal. And yeah, probably more of a rat deck as opposed to a control deck, so hopefully we don't face too many counter spells. This hand is okay, not exceptional. We do have some cheaper plays we can make, although I don't think our opponent's going to have a lot of artifacts and enchantments, other than maybe some mana artifacts we can destroy. And the Meat Locker, as far as interaction goes, also not the most exciting. So I think this is better. We get to ramp with Spring, and then the Paladin can be plotted, so we can maybe combo off in one big turn. Opponent did have the Signet, so would have been able to maybe destroy that. But yeah, next turn plot Paladin, then turn after cast Imoti and immediately combo. So hopefully there's nothing our opponent can do to stop us. They are fine to cast a discard spell here, that's not gonna bother us. But opponent keeps up 4 mana, so that's not what we wanted to see. Because now they could have answers to Imoti, or more importantly, our enchantment. So, yeah, what can we do in the meantime? Just cast a random creature. Yeah, I guess we could cycle the Lurker. If I do it now, I can maybe still hit an extra land drop for a turn. Armadillo can find a land. I guess the problem with this line of play is that we don't force them to use a counterspell if they had one, because we just used a bunch of uncounterable effects. But I'm hoping our opponent just taps out some other way. Immortal Sun, perfect. That's all I needed. So now the coast is clear. Cast Imoti. Hit our Monstrous Vortex. And then that has Ward 2, so I can even potentially target it to remove its abilities by sacking the spawn token. So yeah, let's keep going. And the opponent sees what's happening and scoops it up. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Emmara, so green-white tokens. Our hand actually has some decent early plays. Whale for removal, Gem for ramp, and can even play the Amalgam as an early blocker if needed. For now we can fetch. Now green-white could easily have some enchantment removal, so that's kind of the primary concern. I think I do play the Amalgam to try and block Emmara, so they can just attack for free and make more tokens. They did have a Swords to Plowshares, fair enough. And Caretaker, which can now also keep tapping Emmara. So I'm fine going for the Gem as opposed to keeping up the Whale. And then next turn we can cast Imoti. And then we go to dodge enchantment removal for a turn. Invasion of Gobakan, I guess it doesn't really bother us. Goes for the Whale. Alright, so we're pretty committed here to casting Imoti. And Dollmaker's Shop. So if they get the Porcelain Gallery next turn, that could hurt. And they get to transform the invasion as well. So are we just dead next turn? Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not looking good. Could now play the Wolverine instead to destroy the shop. Because if they go land next turn, Caretaker taps an untapped creature, then this transforms. They'll have essentially 7 creatures once Emmara makes another token. I guess 8 with the shop. So all those creatures will be 8/8 plus an additional counter. So I'm pretty sure we just die if we cast Imoti here. It's a good thing we drew the Wolverine. The array only protects creatures, so they couldn't use it to protect their shop. But yeah, now we're kind of a turn behind in our own game plan. And our opponent's just going to keep going wide. And now Salvager. Next turn can also activate. So we're not out of the woods yet, but opponent's down to 1 card in hand, so it's also less likely that they have an answer to our enchantments. Find our Vortex. And at this point I'll play Boseiju. So yeah, I'm gonna hold tight. Paladin class is fine. Can pump their team. But we should be able to survive 1 attack. So if I block Emmara, that should be fine. Yeah, hopefully their last card's not another pump spell. Could also just soak up even more damage by blocking the 3/3, I suppose. A Virtue of Loyalty makes a token, and then they activate Salvager. So that should be fine. I guess swapping these blocks would have made more sense. Wolverine in front of the 4/4. I guess I missed the fact that they also gain Trample with the Salvager. So yeah, definitely should have swapped those blocks. But I don't think it's gonna matter, because we can just combo off here. Sadly, we have Brawler in hand, as opposed to getting to cascade into it. Alright, let's keep this going. Probably should have kept blue mana untapped so we can channel Otawara for 1 mana. At least we will get to attack with a big haste creature, it seems. Sludge monster probably targets the Salvager. And there's the Wyrm. Alright, that's it. Opponent sacks the array. So I guess Sludge Monster won't be able to target anything. That's fine. And this card, at this point, Forest can go. Gain some life. Get some forests. Alright, and then still have a few options, but I'll just go ahead and attack. Back up to 20. Can channel Augur if needed. Opponent's looking at all our creatures. Takes 13. And pass a turn. Alright, let's see what they can come up with. They're just top decking here. We've got plenty of flying and reach creatures. So they can't steal a game out of nowhere. I'll level up Paladin class. And they're probably just going to go for it and hope I can block everything in time. So they can still activate the Salvager thanks to the Vigilant Knight. Alright, so let's Augur, probably bounce Paladin class. And then I can still gain life with the Armadillo. And then we can line up our blocks. Alright, so we need something big to get in front of the 5/6. This shouldn't be too difficult to figure out. And our opponent scoops it up. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing dragons. Our hands has Altanak, but no fetch land, so can probably do better. Alright, this is certainly better. Got 2 mana interaction, 3 mana ramp, turn 4 plot, turn 5. We can cast Imoti and combo off. Now, opponent is playing 3 colors. They could have counter spells, they could have in green potentially enchantment removal. So those are all potential challenges. And they did keep up 2 mana for now. Could just be Growth Spiral, but nope. So it might be a counter spell that they were keeping up instead. Now the Orb. And we'll just use Beanstalk for ramp. The commander is 6 mana, so for now they glimpse. At least if we plot Paladin, if our opponent's keeping up a counter, we kind of waste their turn. And then if they were to tap out for their commander, we might be in business. It's gonna be Invasion, still 3 mana available. And yeah, opponent is being patient, so they probably have an inkling of what's going on. So I don't think we're going to be able to catch them off guard. So what's our option? Yeah, going for Imoti is unlikely to work out. So instead, I could play my own dragon. Not that it lines up particularly well here. But sure. I need to try and force those counter spells out of their hand. So that now has haste. Can attack the invasion as well, goes face. Alright, so now attack, see what happens. And this has ward 2, so we could attempt to bounce it in response to them playing another dragon, for instance. And then still use Tanuki. It's going to be an Inferno. Uncounterable, has haste naturally. So I guess it is legendary, but their commander removes the legendary type. So yeah, we'll just bounce here. Pay the ward. And that works. So our opponent does seem to be quite patient here, leaving up double blue for what could be a mana drain or just counterspell. So yeah, unless we draw something like a Mirror Shell Crab to counter back, our opponent's eventually going to get us. That's no crab. So yeah, this is probably a spot where I have to go for it, but I don't think it's going to work out. Would love for them to counter Imoti, but they're just going to counter the enchantment. Suppose I could have attacked with the Desert Doom first, in case we drew a crab, but yeah, opponent had the mana drain. So they've probably played against this deck before, so they know exactly what to keep their counter spells for. So can still play the Paladin just to put something on the battlefield. There's also the Sky Turtle, which could potentially get Vortex back out of the graveyard, but not counting on it. Opponent's at 12. And now they get to use the mana drain mana. And I guess I can just pump Inferno enough to win the game, or play Glorybringer alongside it. So yeah, the mana drain was key. And that's game. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Glarb, a Sultai deck. Our hand's got Beanstalk for a bit of mana acceleration, so yeah, this seems good enough. Can get the fetch line out of the way. Turn 3 Beanstalk, turn 4 maybe Imoti, turn 5 combo. So our opponent will have a window to maybe use a counter spell, or enchantment removal could get us too. Yeah, if you're playing against this deck and you see Keruga as companion, then you might want to mulligan to a hand that has either a counter or enchantment removal. We could also not play Keruga as companion to maybe hide a little bit of information. Although I've had a few games where I've actually cast it and then it's drawn me a ton of cards, so there are advantages to still running it as your companion. For now, Halfling. So they could already play Glarb, which is what they do. And now migration path for more ramp. Of course, a Glarb deck is going to have a pretty high curve for the most part. So yeah, given that we don't have to worry about counter spells this turn, I think we go for Imoti and just hope they don't have an answer to our enchantment. Alright, Serpent gives us a bounce spell, but I don't think that's too helpful. So we find our Monstrous Vortex, and we'll see what happens. Glarb surveils. So they are digging. Keeps on top. And now Davriel, that's fine. That doesn't destroy enchantments. And a Metamorph copies Imoti. But Cascade only happens when you cast it and not when you copy something in play. Back to the command zone. Remove perpetual effects, please. And then untap, and I guess we cast the Wyrm so we can attack Davriel and finish it off as well. Since we will be able to give it trample. Alright, and then a Sultai deck could have some board wipes, but they shouldn't be able to exile my stuff. Maybe a Cyclonic Rift with Overload would be painful, or a River's Rebuke. So those are the types of cards we're worried about now. And then I guess Imoti is also an artifact, so with Cavalier we can hit an extra land drop, and then we can also use a Vanguard to blow up Imoti. There's a Cavalier. Since we haven't played land for turn yet. Small chance we draw into a Reliquary Tower as well. Brawler is good to find late in our Cascade chain. And then yeah, we can blow up Imoti with our ETB effect here as well. Sludge Monster can target probably the Halfling to deny a mana, as opposed to Glarb. Alright, so we should be almost through it. More trample effects. Bit of life gain. Our opponent is patiently waiting, so it's possible they have an answer in hand. Now we get to enjoy all our triggers. Boseiju could be useful, and we actually drew Reliquary Tower. So discard islands. And then targets, I think, Halfling, as we've said. This can destroy Imoti. Now we get additional counters from Brawler. And then Cavalier can get Misty. So yeah, we're not attacking for lethal since we only have the one haste creature. But we're still in good shape. Alright, so we can finish off Davriel. And then I can play Reliquary Tower. And then I suppose I could even bounce Glarb here with Serpents. So they don't get to surveil towards another board wipe, maybe. Halfling doesn't make mana, so they're on 6 mana at the moment. Still enough for a River's Rebuke. I wouldn't mind seeing a board wipe, since there's a lot of effects that will still happen. Cards like Rakdos and War Chief leaving behind tokens. Or, I guess with Eudora, creatures turning into lands. Cavalier can also get something back out of the graveyard. So it would be a fun sight to behold. Metamorph can copy one creature. That's fine. Which one do you pick? It's gonna be Cavalier of Gales. So at best they can go land into Damnation, but the opponent doesn't find it and scoops it up. Sweet, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, facing Rakdos the Muscle, so sacrifice deck. And yeah, we've got a keepable hand. Lots of early plays, actually could end up needing an extra 5-drop to trigger in the first place, so Defiler might be a fine one to keep. And the red-black is probably our favorite color pair to go up against, because outside of some discard spells, they don't really have any way to stop our combo. No enchantment removal to worry about. And then Tanuki is going to be the more reliable way to cast Imoti next turn. Our opponent's mono-black so far. And I actually don't hate plotting the Brawler. Because then next turn I can play Moti and immediately combo off, so we don't even give them the opportunity to use sorcery speed enchantment removal that you might see in black. Cards like Feed the Swarm come to mind. Field of Ruin is fine, and now Shieldred's. Alright, Shieldred's a little bit scary, because we will end up drawing a bunch of cards here. But we also gain some life, so I think that'll be fine. So play Moti. And get our Vortex. And cast our Brawler. And our opponent scoops it up, knowing what's incoming. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Nicol Bolas, the Ravager. So discard spells and counter spells are potentially a concern. This hand has Tanuki as well as a Lurker for a bit of ramp. Yeah, this seems keepable. So yeah, it's mainly counter spells that are a concern. Once our enchantment's in play, I don't expect too many ways our opponent can mess with it. So especially with Tanuki and Lurker, we might be able to catch the opponent off guard by ramping at instant speed, and then cast Imoti and cascade into our enchantment, while the shields are maybe down. So start with a tapped breeding pool. Do still need to hit one more land drop to be able to curve out. So the upside of Lurker is that it also draws a card if we cycle it, but they could also destroy the spawn token before we can sack it for mana. And now Valky, actually a pretty decent card here, can take away one of our ramp cards. And our opponent knows what's incoming, perhaps. But at least they haven't played a blue source so far, and a lot of counter spells require double blue. Ends up taking the War Chief. Alright, another Eldrazi we can cycle. So we'll pass if our opponent taps out and we don't need to worry about removal on the spawn. Then I'm probably better off cycling. If they keep up a bunch of mana, then we'll maybe go for Tanuki and then hope to top deck a land. For now, take 2. And our opponent passes with 2 mana up. They didn't even hit a land drop. So yeah, I'll go for Tanuki then. Did not find a land, but Bottomless Pool can bounce Valky. And then I suppose it's reasonable to cycle main phase, just to hit land drop for turn. But on the other hand, we give the opponent the opportunity to play removal. So we'll pass, opponent replays Valky. No real reason to cycle in response, since we have 2 of them. Goes for War Chief again. And yeah, still no additional lands, so our opponent is in trouble. Now, black does have access to a few removal spells for enchantments nowadays, so those could still be happening. Small chance our opponent's a Reanimator deck that's intentionally discarding stuff, but I kind of doubt it. They could also have some of the free pitch elementals, like Subtlety, that could still interfere, but doesn't seem to be the case. Vortex on the battlefield. And yeah, just casting any of our creatures in hand now is basically game over. Wow, they actually had Feed the Swarm. Well, that'll do it. So that's maybe why they kept that hand, just based on having an answer to an enchantment. Doesn't matter if I can't hit my 3rd land. Alright, so we'll have to win in a different way, but I think we can still manage. So, do we cast a Lurker that also triggers Imoti? Seems fine. So yeah, don't feel too bad about our opponents being stuck on 2 lanes. They knew what they were doing. And I think I'm fine trading since I'm out of 6 drops in hand. Opponent accepts. Get the War Chief back, can maybe blitz it next turn. So yeah, opponent had a sound game plan, although their top decks weren't too kind to them. And I mean, our backup plan of casting 5 drops turn after turn is still gonna beat most decks that don't do anything. Take our turn. Yeah, not opposed to blitzing, could also brainstorm shuffle. Could play Tusker to pump the team, but that's maybe better next turn. So, put the pedal to the metal here. They might have removal for my Eldrazi. Yep. And now God Eternal Ronos can also maybe end things next turn. Take 11. And pass. Okay, so still a productive turn. and the Celestus is not going to be good enough. Could also blow it up with a Wolverine. But we can maybe try to end the game in style with God Eternal Runas. Alright, and that's game. Sweet. So we got to see our silly blue-green Cascade combo deck in action, and yeah, if you enjoy casting lots of 5-drops in the same turn for free, then this deck might be for you. But of course the deck is pretty one-dimensional, so if the opponent knows what's incoming, they can potentially mulligan accordingly and look for counter spells or enchantment removal, and then all of a sudden your game plan falls apart. But it is still kind of a fun deck to try every now and then. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.